welcome to the News Minute. I am Dhanya Rajendran. On February 17, 2017, a Malayalam actor was kidnapped and sexually assaulted in her own car. But today we are going to tell you the story of the petty criminal named Pulsar Suni who did this crime. His story has never been straightforward. Over the years, he's changed his versions, he's contradicted, and he has rewritten his own role. Today on News Minute and News Laundry, we publish the second part of Nidhi Suresh's story. The first part was called An Orchestrated Nightmare. In the second part, she actually spoke to Pulsar Suni, the man behind the crime. But it is not an interview that was done for breaking news. It was not an interview on camera. It was an interview stretched out for months. We will tell you through the course of this video why we are publishing this interview only after the verdict is out. But first, let me go across to Nidhi and my colleague Teresa Raju. The editor of the story is, by the way, Lakshmi Priya, who edited the previous story also. So you must be wondering, what is Maria doing here? Maria, in fact, was Nidhi's bodyguard.
Security detail. Because obviously,
Nidhi wouldn't be allowed to meet Pulsar Suni alone. As an editor, that's something I had to make sure of. And Maria was the one who was ready to go for the interviews each time and sit across Pulsar Suni and listen to his version. Nidhi, I know that when you started your first story, you did not think of interviewing Pulsar Suni. The story that we have published is called Inside the Twisted Mind of a Hired Rapist, which is Pulsar Suni. But when did this thought first strike you? Or was it that they got in touch with you?
So in the first story, we've spoken to his mother and we've talked about, what it means for the mother of someone who's at that point accused of rape, and what she was kind of going through. And I think it was in September 2024 that he came out on bail. And a month later, I kind of just tried contacting him through Jinsen, who had been a witness in this case before and who had been in touch with Pulsar Suni throughout. And it was on that chance phone call that I just asked him, would you be okay to speak to us for an on-record conversation? I mean, he is in many senses very central to the story. He was hired to essentially commit a crime of sexual violence. We've heard of contract murders, but contract rape is something that I hadn't heard of before. And in that sense, it was not a story where it was not a whodunit story. This was very clear from the beginning. And for me, it was about trying to understand what it takes to kind of do a hired crime when it's not per se, where he himself claims that this is not his motive. This is not what he wanted, but this was a job for him to do. So in that sense, it was really trying to get to the bottom of how he works and what makes him kind of take up this job. So I think we spoke to him over the span of 13 months, went back to him repeatedly again and again. He contradicts himself multiple times. He, in fact, wants to be an unreliable narrator at one point, which we have spoken about in the story, why he wants to come across as an unreliable narrator. So the objective was that when we talk of stories of sexual violence, we always somehow go to the woman to ask her to reconstruct the narrative. And that is also a way of something that she has to go through to tell us what happened to her. And this is one rare glimpse that we get into the mind of someone on the other side. And this is not a story we get very often. This is not the kind of access that we get very often. And so for me, and when Maria and I started meeting him, it was very clear that this was going to be a long drawn out process to even make sense or try to make sense of his world. And that is essentially the culmination of the story.
In fact, one of the headlines that we thought for the story was guilty, not sorry. Because that's exactly what Pulsar Suni will come across when you read the story. Here's a man who's guilty of the crime. He's not once saying that he did not do what he did. To those who are following this case very closely, I hope you know that Pulsar Suni said in court that he did not kidnap the survivor. He was not in the car. He did, however, say that he was aware of the conspiracy. So basically, he's aware of the conspiracy, but he did not execute it. That's the way he positioned himself in court. But to us, he has never ever denied the crime itself, right? And to our audiences wondering, why are you publishing the story now? See, when we started doing these interviews, which is like Nidhi said, from October onwards, the conversations with Suni starts The story actually narrates how the conversations go, how each time he answers a few set of questions, the next time it's something else. And every time, even during an interview, he will shift places. I'll make you explain all that. But when those interviews came through and finally we had enough material, the question before us is, should we publish this now? There was, of course, one problem that Suni himself told us that he wants the interviews to be published after the verdict. He was very clear that this is his version and he wants the world to know the crime that he committed, why, etc., after he goes to jail. That's one. Second, he was out on bail where he was not allowed to speak to the media. And third, we asked our legal counsels who said that we should not in any way impact the trial, that any journalism that we do should not affect the trial. Now, whatever Pulsar Suni told us very strictly is also what he told the police. There are only two details which he has not told the police that he has told Nidhi. So much of it is, as far as the crime goes, it's a reconstruction of what he has told the police. We'll come to those other two details. But Nidhi's story really explores not the crime, but the criminal behind it. What drives the criminal, right? How are those conversations? First you and then Maria.
For me, we always think of what and how to get a rapist to admit that he did it. Every interview that I've approached with an accused before, I've only built questions as to try and figure out whether this person did it or not. I've never sat across from someone who said, yes, I did it, and this is how I did it. What else do you want to know? It's not an interview that I was immediately prepared for. I don't think either of us were prepared for the way he spoke. He was very approachable in the beginning, but he did warn us very clearly that this is not going to be good for you if it goes out before I go back to jail.
There's a threat.
Yes, he threatened us very clearly on the phone. And then once he started meeting, but he's a very erratic person in the sense that, we've waited 6 hours for one meeting with him, 5 hours, 2 hours, 3 hours. Every time it's very... he's very evasive. When he talks, he's extremely distracted. So every conversation with him drags for at least 2-3 hours before we can get to the point of what we wanted to ask him. And he was very particular about meeting in a isolated place. He would keep shifting places of where he wanted to sit. I'm assuming because he wondered if we were,
doing a spy cam on him, right?
Yeah, if this was a sting operation. So it took a lot of patience from both of us to really, really get him to talk.
Maria, what were your thoughts?
So like Nidhi mentioned, I wasn't expecting this person to be so candid about the crime that he did. In fact, with each passing meeting, it just got even more candid. The first time we met him, it did look like he was sizing us up, whether he could trust us. In fact, when I was asked to go accompany Nidhi to interview Suni, I did not expect that it would go on to 5-6 meetings. I didn't expect him to speak to us for so many times, because that is not the idea of a criminal, that you have somebody who wants to tell you everything that they did, despite having contradicted all of that in court.
So when you all first met him, this is before he goes to court for his deposition, right? At that time, he tells you that I am going to tell the truth in court.
Yeah.
But eventually he does. Whatever is a truth that he claims is to us is not what he tells the court, right?
Yeah. To him, yes, the first time we met him, he was very clear that I am now the kind of person who wants to go and speak the truth. And then the next time he met us, he was very casually said, yeah, I completely lied in court. And then we started talking to him about why. So 2 questions I think we've always had at every meeting with Pulsar Suni is, why does he want to talk to us? And how is he going to explain these contradictions, right? That he said that one thing in court and one thing to the media. This question of why does he want to talk to us, he's answered very differently at different points. To him, he feels like everybody in this case has had a say, except him. Only his story has not been told. Only his version of events has not been told. And he felt like he wanted to tell somebody. And then he had other reasons also saying that,
basically his name will grow in the market.
Yes. And that his market value as a criminal would increase once, there's a story built around him. And the other question that we always had was, how is he going to explain these contradictions, which he's never really answered till now, except saying that he wants the tag of an unreliable person, and somehow that works for him as a criminal.
But I think he was also playing on the plausible deniability, which is why whenever we asked him to come on camera and say all this, he wouldn't. He was agreeable to a text interview in which he said, "You can write my life story." But he goes to court and he says he will not. I remember you telling me, Maria, after one meeting that it was more like he was boasting of his crimes.
Yes, he did come off as boasting about the crime during one of our last conversations, which happened to be in a place along the route that the car took on the night of the crime. Mid conversation, he stopped and said, "This is where it happened. This is the route through which we drove the night of the crime." As Nidhi described it, it looked like he was showing it off, like a memento of the crime. I did it, and this is where I did it, and I'm not afraid or ashamed of telling that.
And not only that, Nidhi, see, it's not just about this crime, right? For me, when Nidhi first mooted the idea that we should interview Pulsar Suni, what I kept telling her is that we cannot limit ourselves to this crime. Through Pulsar Suni, who's a petty criminal, who was a driver of actor Mukesh, which Mukesh is not denied in court at all. Mukesh has said that Suni was his driver, and there were instances where there have been fights and Suni was involved. So there's a petty criminal who is hired by the industry, very well knowing that he's a criminal. A few years ago, he talks about that too. So I told Nidhi that, look, it can't be just about this crime. Through Suni, we have to show a window to the crimes of the industry itself, right? And he did speak about that.
In fact, Suni, at one point when we were talking to him, himself said that, you may think that I'm the biggest villain in this case, but there is a whole system that has enabled my existence here. Suni's been in jail in and out since he was the age of 19. He was 28 when he went in, and he's 36 now. And this is what he has done in his entire life. He describes himself as a criminal. He always says that he's always told us that he's had criminal impulses, and his biggest challenge when he's been out on bail is to not commit another crime. And at one point he asked me, have I read the Hema committee report? And he describes it, what we have throughout our coverage and what we know as gender and human rights violations for him is the norm. And he said, most of what is written in the Hema committee report is right. And this, what I did, is not just my own act. It's being constructed and validated by a system, which is why I could do it. And I think our biggest challenge in the story was also that, yes, Suni felt like he wants his side to be told and all of that, but that's not obviously our attempt to tell his side of the story. It's to really look at what is the structure that makes him possible. And that's the story we've tried to tell through him.
And that structure which makes him possible is the criminality of the industry itself. The industry has criminal elements in it, which encourage other petty criminal elements, and they sort of keep supporting each other, right? Which was pretty shocking. There's one place where he says that people do ask for minors.
Yeah. And I mean, in his own world, he has certain rules for himself. And one of the things he said is he doesn't sleep with minors, but has arranged for minors for other people in the industry. And he says it's just how it is. If you're a new actress coming into the industry, some of the things you have to do, you just have to do. This is the rules of the game that the industry, he believes, exists in. And in his mind, even when he committed this crime, he thought he would go in for a few days and be bailed out soon. And he didn't think that he would be convicted for so long.
Now, that's something which Suni keeps saying throughout this interview, that he never thought this was a big deal. In fact, there's a sentence which he uses, which I suggest you should go read the story, where he compares this crime to a petty activity, to a small activity. Do read the story, because it took us many months to put this together, and almost like extracting a tooth, right? Because you have to sit through this every time and listen to these conversations. And, at one point of time, Suni also talks about the fact that if she had not complained, if the media had not picked it up, it's almost as if it's her fault. It's the media's fault, right?
Yeah. He has told us multiple times, jokingly and not jokingly, that this whole case is made by the media. It's not such a big deal. If it were up to him, it's a one-night job that would have been done and dusted then and there. And truly believes that that he believes that it's a mountain made out of a molehill, essentially.
For those watching, I'm sure you're also wondering, what did he say about who was behind the conspiracy? You can read the story. It is Suni's version. He does point his fingers to Dilip. But as of now, Dilip stands acquitted because the court has not found any proof. Like I told in the beginning, whatever Suni told us is what he has told the police in his deposition. So this is not stuff that is not there with the police already. They have it. The court also has it. But there are two things, Nidhi, which he tells you guys, which he has not told the police. One is that he did get money for the crime. And the second is far more shocking.
Yes, he mentioned about the payment. And the other thing that he mentioned, which we were both taken aback when he said it that night, was because we know so far that there are 2 copies that have been made of the assault visuals. One is in the custody of the court, and the other is one that he claims he has handed over to a boutique, which is Dilip's wife's boutique. While speaking to us, he just slipped it in and he said he's made 3 copies of the visuals. And we both immediately stopped and asked him, but what's the 3rd copy got to do? Where does it exist? And he said, if one makes a visual like this, you would keep 1 copy for yourself, right? That was his answer. And then immediately I followed up with, have you shown the visuals to anyone? And he said, no, but that's a horrible thing to do. So these are kind of like his contradictions. He completely admits himself and then starts policing the question almost. But he mentioned about also the phone on which he recorded the
But that's something he's
visuals of the
always
assault.
unclear about, right?
He's always been unclear even to us, and he's always told me at every meeting that this is something he cannot talk about, but only went so far as to say that it's somewhere safe.
So my final question to you is, Maria, was there also an element of fear? Because I know that there was at first instance itself where he gave a threat, veiled, we can call it, that if you publish the interview before I go to jail, then it will not be good for anyone, right?
There was more curiosity than fear. This might sound wrong to say, but I was glad I got to go with Nidhi. I guess that's justified for a journalist to be curious that way. I was glad I got to go with Nidhi and sit through all the interviews and, be a part of the story that way. So there was more curiosity than fear. But then during one of the meetings, he said, "Oh, I don't see you around Kochi." And then at that moment, I'm like, "Why are you looking for me in Kochi?" So yeah, there are those moments, but I don't know. I don't think there was much fear.
I definitely
I
was.
think there's an eeriness around Suni in this way where he's very unpredictable. So he also has a certain skill of making you very comfortable when he's talking. So he'll inquire about you. He's very interested about your personal life. He'll always remember details about you. But there is always this feeling of uncertainty because he has very rarely actually met us during the day. He's always wanted to meet in the evening. He's always made us wait for very long. You don't know where he's coming from. He's getting down a vehicle where there's a group of people inside. So I think that while we've both engaged in this from a space of journalistic curiosity, it's undeniably we've had moments of eeriness. But I think the curiosity is always...
Yeah, when I say I did not have fear, I have to add that we were still cautious. Like on our way back home, how we'd get home, whether we go directly home. All of those things, we were cautious.
Can I ask you a question? As an editor, when you were working on this story and when we approached the story, this has been a very challenging story for all of us, right? That we've constantly discussed why we're doing this story. After these 13 months, how do you kind of place this in terms of why we did it and why it was important to tell this story?
So I was very skeptical of the story, not of the interview, but of the writing, because I feared that we shouldn't come across as people saying that, oh, he had a very bad childhood or his father was an alcoholic. Therefore, there are so many buts and therefores in everybody's life, right? I did not want us to end up doing any of that, but I did not want to also lose any of the things that he said. My primary fear was that. My second fear was that when you write the story, you write it carefully, when to publish, right? Whatever we do, we should not hamper any chances that the prosecution had, the police had, or the survivor had. That was my second concern. Now, when I look back at the story, See, vis-a-vis the crime, right? Who was behind the conspiracy? Suni can make claims. People are going to discuss about our interview for some time. I don't know if it'll have any value when we go for an when the prosecution goes for an appeal, because after all, these are Suni's assertions. Raman Pillai, who's Dilip's advocate, has always said that you cannot believe what a petty criminal like Suni is saying against someone like a Dilip. So even vis-a-vis the criminality, I don't know if the story is something that will be remembered for a long time or it will weigh. But I definitely know that this is perhaps the first time in India that we are looking so carefully at someone who's been hired for sexual violence. And that someone not to feel remorse or guilt, but to think that it is the woman's fault that a complaint was filed. It is somebody else's fault that there has been limelight on this. Otherwise, everything would just have vanished. I think it is that attitude, right, which really scared me while I kept reading or editing, thinking that that is all these men are thinking about this. That, oh, why did she complain? That's how it became a big deal. That someone is going through trauma for years because of this. In fact, when the judgment comes, can one imagine the trauma that the survivor is going through? And Suni was in court apparently arranging for alcohol and soap.
I think it's surprising for us that the men would think that, because we do not know about the number of cases that probably went unreported.
Yeah, but see,
That
in
could
those
have-
cases, Maria, most of the cases people are indulging in sexual violence either because of power or because a spur of a moment, anger, passion, whatever it is, right? You classify rapes into a lot of things. This is not any of that. It's a very pre-planned act where you are getting paid to go and do something to someone. It's a very different category of sexual violence. And in that, they can think like that was... So I hope that when people look back at the story, to your question, they don't look back at this as Suni's version of events. It is not Suni's version of events. It is us trying to understand the version of events through Suni's perspective too. That this is all it matters to all of them at the end of the day. Somebody's trauma is this minuscule for them.
And also, what's most scary about him is how ordinary he is. We have an idea of a rapist, and we always think of this like sort of evil person in mind when you meet immediately. Suni does not come across like that. He comes across like anyone you could meet on the street, who then says some of the most difficult things to hear and some of the most brutal things about the women in a very banal tone. And to think that this could be anybody in your surrounding is actually what takes me aback the most in this particular situation.
Okay, so thank you, Nidhi, and thank you, Security Detail, Maria. To all of you listening or watching, this has been a difficult story for us to do. This has also been a case that we have been very involved in. So do read the story. Yes, it is behind a paywall. A small news version of it is also gone. But the story is in the narrative. The story is in what Nidhi tells you about what she saw, what she heard. So do subscribe to the News Minute and News Laundry. Do read the story and keep supporting our journalism. Thank you. Till the next time.